From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around and listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
So, second episode, Ash, congratulations on that. We said last time we would like to spend some time talking about stakeholder management, which you have told me, and I agree, based on experience, is not something marketers and consulting firms tend to do super well. Big picture from what we've seen. So, what's your take there? What makes you jump to that conclusion?
Well, let's just think about like stakeholder management as in, when you want to talk to a class, you need to talk to the key people in the class who actually the others listen to, or at least respect or obey or whatever. It's the same thing in any large group. Whoever is the key point of influence. Yeah, I mean, just look at influencer marketing. What we do is we just find these micro influencers who can talk to like thousands of people and do that. Now, in companies, it's a little easier on that level because we pretty much position people into these roles. Great.
But hold on. But that's where consultancies are different, right? Because it's not that strict line, you're the boss of me, the SVP tells the VP what to do. It's not that. It's very much more matrix. It's very, I would say, democratic even. Lots of partners, lots of cooks in the kitchen. So yeah, that's why I always think the importance of good stakeholder management is actually elevated. You should think that is super critical.
Okay.
But as we've seen...
I mean, in that case, it lends itself to a cooking example.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with the classroom. Like lots of people in the classroom. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. But a cooking example where you need the sous chef, you need the head chef, and you need all the people there to know what everyone's doing, to know when they get the ingredients, to know their specific roles. Otherwise, it's just going to be one of those kitchen nightmares kind of episode, which is not what we want. What you want with good stakeholder management is, first of all, understand what you are trying to do. What's your strategy? What are you trying to achieve, and everything. And it shouldn't be some hugely complex thing. It should just be something that you can define in a sentence or in a single question.
Yeah.
Once you've got that, then you can identify who are the people you need to convey all these messages and stuff.
Publish this year's big piece of thought leadership for X industry, right? That's that sort of thing. So it could be a project like that, fairly simple, or seemingly simple, as we know. Stuff can get complicated.
It's simple to talk about.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about. Yeah.
But yes, once we get all these key stakeholders understood, that's where we start. That's the point where you're like, oh, all right, we now know who these people are. We now know what they need to know, when they need to know, how they get. Yeah, we have plenty of project managers in consulting organizations. We have plenty of PMOs. They're needed, but without good stakeholder management, just like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll let you say that.
Yeah, so but I mean, so what you're saying is, okay, create clarity around what the objective is. Always a good idea, right? And then, but from that, sort of determine, given that that's what we're trying to do, right? Who needs to know about it, and who might be able to, I don't know, influence it positively, negatively. Sort of just map. I mean, I guess people can find lots of stuff online around how do I do stakeholder mapping, or how do I group people by, I don't know, interest, influence, whatever. There's various methods, but the idea is get that map down.
Yeah.
So that is something you can hand off to a PMO, maybe together with a plan for how to engage those people over the lengths of time, over the course of time, right? But before we started, you said something about that is actually, so being able to do that, you said was actually a critical communication skill, right? In marketing.
Yes.
Can you riff on that? Because I thought it was good.
Okay. So stakeholder mapping is always a communication skill, because you need to know whom to talk to, what to talk to, why, and when. Essentially, I know I went to 4 points, but there are the 3 C's of comms. And stakeholder planning is really essential to get these 3 C's right.
Yeah.
And as a marketer, you don't sit in a function being like, here's marketing, here's communications. Almost everywhere it's marketing and communications. If you don't understand your sibling, your twin, you're not really going to do your job that well. You really need to understand why you need to communicate, what you need to communicate, and who you need to communicate. And it needs to be effective. And this happens when you have good stakeholder management. A really easy way to understand an organization that doesn't have good stakeholder management: their internal comms is a mess.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I mean,
If you're interested, yeah.
I mean, I'll admit that. I mean, I've been bad at this a couple of times. Because I mean, you learn over time, but I've certainly messed up that bit, the stakeholder management part over time. So I would say that also I think you were in the macro level with internal comms. I think if I speak to the project level, like how could you tell my stakeholder management was off? Probably key influence is not involved, or sort of only sporadically involved, which gets you naughty surprises. If you create the piece of thought leadership in that industry, and then I involve a bunch of SMEs, but I don't involve that partner over there who might have an opinion as well and want to speak to it. So I loosely know that, but I don't include him. And then, of course, right, at the end of the project, he'll come back around and yell around why he wasn't involved. So this type of stuff. I've also erred on the side of over-communicating, sort of spamming people who were just loosely interested, sending them sort of weekly status updates until someone eventually wrote back and said, please send me off that email chain. I really don't know what. I think the wording was, I don't see how I'm adding value here. And I was like, oh shit. Like, so, and not having that clarity leads to all kinds of downstream errors.
No.
But speaking of my own mistakes, I think one of the things, and that's why I like when you mention it as a skill, thinking of it as something you have to have and you have to sort of employ and deploy. That's also something I didn't do early in my career. Like, I was not carving out time in a project to do that stuff. And depending on project complexity, might be that you have to give a Friday away. Like, in your 5-day week, reserve the Friday to do the politics game and involve the influences and make sure, the trains run on time, that sort of stuff. I don't know how you see that.
Here's some insight. Like, since you were talking about past lives, right? When I first did stakeholder, management and things like that, we just did it like we had to do it. But I joined somewhere, not naming names, where initially, before you start out on any strategy, before you start to roll things out, before you work on, as you start working on the project, you start with your stakeholder management in a meeting. So imagine you've got like a big initiative. It's multi-stage, multi-led, and all of that. The first thing you do is you ask the key question of what you're trying to initiate, and then you map all the stakeholders in a 30 to 45-minute session. And this was done before everything. Of course, later steps in that would involve other, you might need to do other bits of stakeholder planning for, like, say, doing the comms or marketing or doing like the financial planning or various other things. But this first thing, that was key. And that was always run as a 30 to 45-minute meeting with the key person who was running the project. And that's not the project manager, that's the owner. And that's something that needs. Yeah, go on.
That's the project owner, because I was going to ask, because what interests me here is, now, if you speak about marketing folks in consulting firms, do you have a tip? Like, how should they do this? Do I take the responsibility and ownership for my stakeholder map, list, whatever? Like, do I say, well, let marketing handle this. We figured out, here's the list. I sign it off. And then I run into trouble later on because I, again, forgot about this MD over there. Or do you say, like, your, for lack of a better word, your internal clients, like whoever you do this project for, like the practice or whatever, do they have to give this to you? And then I guess the option in the middle would be you draw it up jointly and then everybody signs and says, we think this is cool. So, because you know how it is. At the end, there's a certain element of blame game. So, and also responsibility for the thing should be clear. So how do you typically handle this? Do you have a best practice to share?
So I do, but I definitely have a question to ask you before that. Yeah. Like, you worked in communications, right?
Yeah.
And when you worked in communications, what did they see you as, or what were you expected to be seen as?
Do you mean from the business side?
well, yeah, business side, or when you get hired or anything like that, what is essentially, you'd know this because it's something we don't think about once you get into marketing. Because as soon as you get into marketing, you're basically treated as this one-man machine, one-woman machine to do everything.
Well, in the communications role, I think the job was very much sort of messaging related and how to communicate the thing we want to do to whatever the audience is. I don't know if that's what your question asks.
My question was well more like, I think you're touching on it, but the thing is, they hire you to basically be the advisor to someone in the business.
That is true. Yeah, it was our job to sort of help them, as the cliche goes, tell the truth in a way that gets through the clutter, right? Yeah.
We, as comms professionals, we were never the people who owned anything, but we were the ministers to these kings and queens.
That's true to some extent. Although I would say I've seen the opposite also, like where you are expected, as someone who works in the marketing or comms function, you are expected to help people navigate the corporate approval and compliance and nonsense processes. Yes. Now, this might not be true in smaller firms, but if the place is reasonably big enough, I would say that people look at you and say, maybe implicitly, because like we said, it was rare for me to get that level of professional stakeholder management. Mm-hmm. Embarrassingly late in my career, I started doing that. So, but the implicit expectation would be, oh, this guy's in comms. He knows, how to get approvals from legal or who in brand needs to see this. That was always implicitly there, but because it wasn't explicit, I also often did a crappy job at it, just because it wasn't clear. Because I often sat on the other side and was like, oh my goodness, these senior managing directors are handing this to me. They must know how this is, and they didn't, right? Because they didn't.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like the expectation is that. Well, the expectation in some organizations I worked was that they'll put a comms person besides every leader. The comms person is also skilled at marketing. Mm. And this comms person is their guide through the organization, like you were saying, their advisor who helps get their messaging across and everything. So this comms person was their key thing. Now, in large organizations, nameless ones, marketing and comms are like combined. And marketing people often do the case, marketing people often do communications, but they don't seem to remember these things that they've done from their time, however brief it might be.
Well, they just
exceptions, but
I don't know if they don't remember. They just don't apply it internally, which is wild, right? If you have a project internally, it's very much like you have a product and want to take it to market. You gotta communicate around it properly, for it to be successful or widely successful. If you don't do it, maybe even fail or run into 1,000 obstacles, which then give you headaches. But I wanted to hear your best practice in terms of, like, you spoke of, like, stay a little bit in your story. You did the meeting, like, what was the outcome? Did everybody sign that thing and say this is now fine?
So the 45 once you have these 30-minute 45-minute meetings, whatever length, you basically identify all the key stakeholders. You get to know what level of responsibility they have for the project, and sometimes someone in that meeting, you'll find that they're not really that important, but they still need to know. So you do the whole thing, like everyone in marketing knows to do races and stuff, and similarly you basically just plan around all of this, and then you identify who really needs to be here and who doesn't, and get everyone going from there. So people do sign for the original charter, people do sign off. All the other things that come after in between, well, people who, if it's like a marketing-led event or a comms-led thing or, like I said, financial planning, those key people will sign off on it and they will own it and take it. But the owner of this activity should be the person who works with the project manager to deliver it.
So and then in most scenarios I've seen, firms all sizes, what you said, project owner, that is sort of the sponsor. That will be the guy or gal in the practice who asks for the marketing project and the marketing team delivers it. So in my fictional example from beginning, like the practice leader who wants to push out that piece of thought leadership also owns the stakeholder.
Yeah, they own the stakeholder. They can delegate it to the marketing person to do.
Yeah, the communications and so forth. But they say, this is the list. Mm-hmm. The people who are on here, they need to be involved. People who are not on here, sorry, I'll take it up with them if there's complaints.
Yeah, and especially marketing and consulting firms, the owner is often the person who knows enough about that project. There's a reason why they came, for them to create that. The person in marketing is less likely to really know why this exists. They just kind of go through what needs to be done to get this successful, to get it to the market, to communicate it. But the owner needs to take ownership. And if not, we will have a situation in a matrixed organization where
we've all been in those situations.
where people don't know what they don't know, and they don't speak to people who should be in the know. And ultimately, we can get into like what is needed in a large organization, but on a basic project level, this still needs to be done.
Because you still get nonsense. You get like people finally being brought in at late stage. So that's always my major concern. Is like the worst thing that can happen is sort of a partner or MD or something like that comes in at the 11th hour because someone finally thought of involving them, and then of course they have changes to the project, so they have concerns about the go-to-market or whatever it is at the point in time where making changes is the most expensive because like 80% of the stuff is done. And I should tell you offline, I have seen a client do a major trade show once. Where one of the country sponsors flew in the day before, had never seen the booth design, and he hated it. And so he forced them to take down banners and stuff, which they did, and they replaced them. Like it all got done, and he was happy afterwards. But it probably cost like 10 interns complete nerves and $1 bazillion. I don't know, but that stuff happens if you don't have the stakeholder management part down, and I think it happens every day in these firms. Like I see a lot of it. Really.
No, completely correct. And here's the interesting thing. Consulting firms by default understand this on some level, which is the reason why they assign a marketing lead to a business lead.
Yeah, which is per se a good thing. I agree. It's like an account management structure, sort of.
But once they've done that, that's it. It's like, hey, we've done the bare minimum, and now, hey, let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, the org chart looks good. Let's see if it works. And then there's no conversation between the various marketing leads, or there is some of it, but it's not structured in a way which is because that is really shouldn't be the case. But the number of projects where stuff was handled the way you described in your story, like the first thing that's done is the stakeholder management. I'm gonna say 20% of those I've seen across like everything I've ever done, which you said.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. I've not seen much of that in lots of companies, and not just consulting firms. But the companies that tend to do this well tend to market directly to consumers.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's what I've noticed. The companies that don't market to consumers don't seem to realize that the people who work in these companies are also a bit human, and they're also a bit chaotic. Maybe that's part of it, because they're so used to selling to businesses, they forget the human element. It could be a thing. I don't know.
Interesting. That's interesting. I would have a hypothesis about just general marketing maturity and process and skill sets, maybe even between B2C and B2B, but that's probably unfair to B2B marketers. I don't know. But anyways, maybe we can get into some. You mentioned the stakeholder mapping exercise. I was wondering if you have if we could share some tips or stuff as you go about then continuing to work with those stakeholders. Like we said, we could see this on the project level and maybe on a multi sort of on a program or higher complexity level. But I think the recipes for doing it well once you figure out whom to talk to is roughly similar. Would you agree?
It is, but you basically kind of opened a minefield there by literally differentiating between program and project. That's something that consulting firms actually need to get a handle on, because a program is something that's really long term, and a project is something that's done in one of their quarterly cycles usually.
Yeah, in my mind, it's always program is like the one thing. Like it's the event in Germany you do next week. That's a project. Above that sits the campaign. Like that event is probably part, hopefully, of a broader go-to-market campaign. And then program is what I have been taught to call like a bundle of campaigns. Like you do 10 campaigns, they form a program, and it probably runs for even longer than just a year. Might be that's a 3-year thing that those sometimes still exist. Even though everybody's doing 1-year strategies nowadays, which
No, that exactly is the point. Like when you're having a program, like you assign growth growth agendas and priorities and areas. Those should be like whenever you sit and say, this is our aim for like fiscal 25.
Yeah.
Now that should be within a program, and you should have multiple projects under it. But the way things get lined up, maybe on a business level, there will be programs, but those business level programs getting communicated to marketing
Then we have the
doesn't
communications
happen.
again.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. So maybe the thing is what I had a conversation with you, offline, which is essentially large companies or companies of a certain size, they need a strategic initiatives organization within marketing that does not report into marketing, but reports into the business.
Yeah.
And as in the heads of the business, because what strategic initiatives does is they are the orchestrator. They speak to all the various groups and they understand this is what we need to talk about. This is what we need to do. Hey, this group is doing this project and you're doing this project. It's not a function of like campaigns. It's not a function of like content. This is a function of like, we need to report this to senior management. They need to know what the organization is. So everyone else reports into this group, not like a direct report kind of thing. Everyone gives the information into this group, who then feed it.
And they have an overview of stuff that's going on, and they can.
And this is a key marketing and comms function that needs to exist in large organizations, because while they may exist in some shape or form, it's more done on a need basis rather than a fixed full-time employee doing this consistently. And people who do things on the side as side projects don't give it the dedication, and you lose things in the midst.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an issue.
All right. So if I can sum that up, I mean, we both agree stakeholder management utterly critical. You gave the pro tip, which I've been following for the latter part of my career, and that helped quite a bit, is to actually just bloody start everything you do with that. If there's a certain level of complexity to it, which in a consulting firm probably there's always the case. But yeah, so that was good. I think we covered it. Do stakeholder management, do it well, figure out what you're going to do, build a map from there. It's not a one-time stakeholder map we use 20 times over. It's got to be tailored to the project, and then figure out a comms plan to keep people involved, engaged, and up to date with the stuff you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You'll be much better off. I think that's it. Do you want to wrap up?
I think you've closed it quite well, Flo. I don't have
that'll be enough for me then. So have a nice rest of the day, and then see you soon.
See you guys soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.